chapter 36, which many study Bibles title The History of Esau. And you'd wonder why you'd want to study the history of Esau. And if you read chapter 36, you wonder why you bothered to read it. That's not really true, though. You see, if we take a look at chapter 36, we find out that Esau recognized that Jacob was blessed in the land of Canaan, that God had given him that land, and that was going to be his land. And he recognized that the herds that he had and the herds that Jacob had were just too much for the land. And so he moved towards Edom. And in Edom, we have a history of the kings, and if I counted them correctly, 8 kings. And it tells us about the chiefs, or the royalty, the dukes, if you will, that were descendants of Esau. And if I counted them correctly, there are 10 of those. And you say, well, so what? Who cares? Who cares who all of the sons that you can't pronounce the names, and all of the wives that you can't pronounce the names, and all of the activities of Esau? After all, he was not a very good person. But there are some wonderful lessons for us to learn from chapter 36. First of all, if you believe in typology, and I do, Esau was a type for the flesh and the carnality of those that are not believers. Let me say that again for you. I believe that Esau is a type for the flesh and the things of the flesh, carnality. Secondly, the Edomite history is quite interesting, and it brings validity to the scriptures. Who in the world would make up all of those names, all of those kings, all of those children, and all of that history that just wanted to write an interesting book? No, it shows you that God wanted us to know the history, and he wanted us to see the contrast between Esau and Jacob. But even more than that, he wanted us to see the contrast between Jacob's wives and Esau's wives. Do you remember how that all got started? Esau wanted to impress his father. That was not enough that he married a Canaanite, which was against his father's wishes. But then he even went over and married the descendant of Ishmael. Again, a heathen. And so we see this terrible, terrible history of Esau's choices of wives versus Jacob being obedient to his father and going to his own people for wives. Now, Esau had a favorite wife, and maybe you would wonder why he had one favorite wife if he was a representative of the flesh. Well, his wife was a priestess, but not the kind of religious priestess we might think about. She was a temple prostitute, which meant she was probably a very attractive woman, probably a very alluring woman, but she was also a type for carnality, sensuality. And even though Esau changed her name to try to make her name more palatable to his people, she nevertheless was type for flesh, for lust, for sensuality. Now, one of the things that came out of Esau's life was 3 elements: the Canaanite portion, the Horite portion, and the Ishmaelite portion. Evil through and through. Definitely a good representative for the flesh. Well, is that biblical? If you'll read Romans chapter 9, verse 13, where it says, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. If you read Hebrews chapter 12, verse 16, where it says, immoral and godless, like Esau, you'll find that Esau definitely represents the flesh. Now, John Phillips is one of my favorite commentary writers, and he says of Esau being a type for the flesh, we need to understand what the flesh is. The flesh is prolific. That means rapidly increasing. It is pious. That means it's lofty, looking down its nose at others. The flesh is prosperous. That is, it seems to be materially blessed. The flesh is persuasive. That means it's able to change people's minds. It's pugnacious, which means it's harmful or destructive. It's powerful. It means it has authority and control. It's persistent. That means it's never ceasing in its attempt to corrupt us. It's proud. That means it's vain and consistent and conceited. And it's pedigreed. That is, in the world standards, very often you'll find the flesh has a long chain of pedigrees. Think about that for a minute. That's John Phillips' description of the flesh. And it's a very good one. Because we know the things of the flesh are not the things of the Spirit. And the things of the Spirit are not the things of the flesh. So why read chapter 36? Well, because you see clearly a typology of Esau and a typology of his wives as contrast to Jacob and his wives. You see the Edomite history. You see the favorite wife who is nothing more than a temple prostitute representing the flesh, the lust, and the sensuality. You see the three elements that would be a thorn in the side for all of those that were true Jews, that were true believers in God. And you'll see what kinds of causes they created in the land that was promised to the Israelites. You see that very well that evil can and does prosper. Let me say that again, because sometimes we think we know that evil always gets punished and goodness always gets blessings, but that's not the case in the world that we live in today. You see, it's very clear that Esau was prospering. Esau's flocks were so great that he had to move. And so we see that evil can prosper. And we notice that if you read Deuteronomy chapter 2, that Esau destroyed the Horites. The flesh is always evil. The flesh always wants those things that are contrary to God's wishes. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And that's my thought for the day. Why not go back and read chapter 36? Think about some of the things that I've said. Chapter 36 may make a lot more sense to you after you do. God bless you and have a great day.